The moontithe was where a pack sent the daughters it did not want. Everyone in the kingdom of Night Hollow knew it, though no one said it aloud in the great hall of Wolfmere Keep, where 40 unmated she-wolves knelt in 2 long rows beneath banners of crimson and iron, waiting for the Alpha King to walk past them and choose, or not choose, and change nothing about their lives either way. Serene knelt at the end of the second row, apart from the others, the way the defective ones always knelt apart, and she kept her eyes fixed on a torch bracket high on the far wall, on nothing, on the middle distance where blind girls were supposed to live. 6 years. 6 years of looking at nothing while seeing everything, and she had never once slipped. "That's the blind one," a girl whispered somewhere to her left, the whisper carrying the way whispers always did in stone halls. From the Vane household, her uncle sent her to fill the tithe so he could keep his real daughters home. A blind tithe bride. A soft, cruel laugh. He might as well have sent a chair. Serene let the words settle over her like snow. She had learned long ago that humiliation was a coat you could wear until it stopped being cold. A blind girl was never chosen. A blind girl was never claimed. A blind girl was never dragged to a mating stone under a full moon by a wolf who had bought her the way men bought oxen. That was the whole of the bargain she had made with herself at 14, kneeling in ash with her mother's hands pressed over her face, and she had never regretted it. Not on the hungry nights. Not on the lonely ones. The horns sounded from the outer gate, 3 long notes that made the torch flames shiver, and the hall rose in a single rustling motion like a field bending under wind. Serene rose too, half a beat behind, letting her hand find the shoulder of the girl beside her as if she needed the guidance. The girl flinched away from her touch. That was fine. Flinching was useful. Flinching meant no one looked closely. The Alpha King of Night Hollow entered his hall the way winter entered a forest, without hurry and without mercy. She did not look at him. She let him exist at the blurred edge of her stillness, a tall darkness moving down the first row of kneeling girls, and she built him out of sounds instead. Boots on stone, heavy but unhurried. Behind him, softer steps, the dry shuffle of an old man's gait, the click of a woman's heeled shoes. The whole court breathing in one held breath. "Alaric Vane looks at no one," her uncle Osric had told her in the wagon, picking at his teeth. "He hasn't chosen a bride in 6 years, not since the fire took his queen. He'll pass you by, you'll scrub his floors for a season, and the Vane name will have paid its due. Even you can manage that girl, even blind." Even blind. She had smiled at nothing, the way she always did, and said, "Yes, uncle." Boots on stone, closer now. He had reached the second row. Serene loosened her gaze until the whole hall was a smear of gold and shadow, until her eyes were 2 dead lamps in her face. And then something small broke loose from the world. A child's footsteps, quick and uneven, skittering out from behind the dais, where no child should have been. A wooden toy struck the stone floor and rolled, a little carved wolf tumbling down the shallow steps, straight toward the iron brazier at the foot of the royal platform, and the child ran after it. A boy, small, dark-haired, with a scar like melted wax climbing the left side of his jaw, running headlong after his toy, with his eyes on nothing but the little wolf rolling toward the flames. Serene's eyes moved. She could not have stopped it. 6 years of discipline, and her eyes snapped to the child the way iron snaps to a lodestone, tracked him, measured the distance between his reaching hand and the brazier's glowing belly, and her whole body leaned, half a step, ready to lunge before the frozen, protocol-strangled court could decide whether it was permitted to touch a prince. A guard got there first. He scooped the boy back. Another man kicked the toy clear of the coals, and the hall exhaled with a sound like a wave going out. Serene dragged her gaze back to the torch bracket, back to nothing. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she was sure the girl beside her could hear it. 1 heartbeat. 2. It was nothing. Nobody watched the blind girl. That was the whole architecture of her survival. 6 years of being furniture. 6 years of being a chair. The boots on stone had stopped. She felt him before she understood what she was feeling. the way you feel a storm through a closed door. The whispers died so completely that she could hear the brazier ticking. Then the boots came toward her, unhurried, and stopped an arm's length away, and the Alpha King of Night Hollow stood in front of the blind tithe bride and looked at her, and said nothing for so long that somewhere behind him an old man cleared his throat.
Your name! His voice was low and rough at the edges, like a blade that had been used. She kept her eyes on the middle distance, a hand's width to the left of his face. That was the discipline. Never at the eyes. Never at the eyes. Serene, your majesty, of the Vane household. The blind one. Yes, your majesty. Silence again. She could smell the winter on him, pine and cold iron, and something underneath it, like smoke that had soaked into a man years ago and never fully left. His gaze moved over her face, the way a physician's hands move over a wound, and she stood inside that gaze and thought, with a calm that felt like falling, he saw. He saw. He saw. Elder Voss, the king said, without turning, the law gives me the choosing of any tithe daughter for the service of the crown. Does it not? The dry-gated old man came shuffling forward. It does, Majesty, though the custom is to choose girls of, forgive me, of sound body, for the honor of the household that receives them. There are healthier. I did not ask for custom, I asked for law. The law permits any choice, Majesty. Then I choose this one. A murmur went through the hall, like wind through wheat, and the king's voice cut it off at the root. My son needs an attendant, one with patience, one who will not stare at him. A pause, thin as a knife. She is well suited, she cannot. Laughter, quick and nervous, from courtiers who thought it was a joke. Serene stood very still and stared at nothing while the world quietly caved in, because she had heard what the court had not. The small, cold weight under the word cannot, like a stone dropped into a well to measure its depth. The contract will be drawn tonight, the Alpha King said. She comes to the keep at dusk. He walked on. The boots faded. The hall breathed again, and 40 she-wolves turned to look at the blind girl, who had just been chosen by the man who chose no one. And Seren thought, someone in this room set that boy running. And then she thought, no, that is fear talking. And then she thought, either way, he saw my eyes move, and I am already dead. It will simply take some weeks to happen. She was wrong about that. It would take far longer, and it would be far stranger than dying. The contract was read aloud to her that evening in the steward's chamber, since the blind bride could not read it herself, and Seren stood and listened to the terms of her captivity dressed up in the language of honor. Attendant and companion to Prince Torin, sole heir of Night Hollow, aged 7 years. Residence within Wolfmere Keep, its walls not to be passed without the crown's leave. Wages, board, and the protection of the Alpha King's own name. And then the steward paused, and she heard the parchment turn, and he read the last clause in the careful voice of a man reading words he did not understand. Item the 9th. The attendant Serene of House Vane shall keep the whole of her service faithfully, and shall be released from this contract on the day the king declares that she has given him her eyes. The candle guttered. The steward coughed. Poetic language, no doubt, he said. His Majesty drafted that item himself. I'd not trouble yourself over it, girl. Kings write how they please. Yes, Seren said, to the middle distance. No doubt. Given him her eyes, she signed with the awkward, sprawling mark of a woman who could not see the page, and all the while a voice in the deepest cellar of her mind whispered, He knows. He is playing with you. This is a cat writing contracts with a mouse. And another voice, quieter and far more dangerous, whispered back, Then why has he told no one? They gave her a narrow room off the prince's corridor, and her first visitor arrived before she had finished feeling the walls with her hands for the benefit of anyone watching. The door opened without a knock. Heeled shoes clicked across the floor, and a scent came with them, ambergris and crushed roses, expensive and suffocating. So you are the king's charity. The voice was young, cultured, beautiful the way frost on a window is beautiful. Stand up straight, girl. Let me look at what 6 years of mourning does to a man's judgment. I am Lady Mara of House Corvin. My great-uncle sits first among the king's counselors, and I sit. A soft rustle of silk, a laugh like a small bell made of ice. Very near the throne. Near enough. My lady, Seren said, and bowed to a point slightly beside her. Mara circled her slowly. Seren tracked her by sound and scent and kept her eyes drifting, unmoored, while the lady's gaze pressed on her face like thumbs. Plain, Mara pronounced at last. Underfed and broken. His Majesty has taken in 3-legged hounds before. It passes. They end in the kennels. Understand something, girl. The rose scent leaned close. The king's grief is nearly finished. When it ends, I will be the one standing beside him, and I keep a very orderly house. Broken things get thrown away. Yes, my lady, the heels clicked away. At the door they paused. They say the smoke took your sight. What a mercy, Lady Myra said sweetly, that you will never have to see how little you belong here. The door closed. Seren stood in the middle of her small dark room, and for the first time in 6 years, she let her eyes focus, deliberately, on a closed door, with hatred, and it felt like taking off a shoe full of stones. Careful, she whispered to herself. Careful, careful. Because it had begun to happen already, the thing she had feared more than discovery. Under this roof, in this den of the one wolf who had caught her, she had started to want to look. She met the prince the next morning in the nursery tower, and the meeting undid her in a way no cruelty ever had. Torrin of Night Hollow sat by the cold hearth with his carved wooden wolf, rescued from the brazier with one ear scorched black, and he did not look up when the nurse announced her, and he did not speak. He never spoke, the nurse explained flatly. Not since the fire, 6 years gone. The healers found no ruin in his throat. He simply would not. He had been barely a year old when the summer lodge at Thornmere burned with the queen inside it, and whatever a child that small kept of such a night, he kept it silently, and the court had long ago stopped waiting. He bites sometimes, the nurse added, gathering her mending, clearly delighted to be handing him off. And he hides. Good luck to you, girl. They've given a mute boy a blind keeper. The gods laugh. The door shut. Boy and false blind girl remained. Seren lowered herself to the floor a small distance away, arranged her skirts, and did not turn her face toward him. She sat with her eyes on nothing and let the silence stretch. 1 minute, 5, 10. He was watching her, she could feel it. That particular prickle of a child's stare, sidelong and suspicious. I'll tell you a secret about me, she said at last, to the empty hearth. Everyone thinks that because my eyes are dark, my ears must be too. So they say things in front of me. The cook says the steward waters the king's wine. The steward says the cook is in love with the master of hounds. I know everything in this keep already, and I've been here one day. She paused. I don't need you to talk, little lord. I talk enough for 3. But no one has told me what your wolf's name is, and it seems to me a wolf that survives a brazier ought to have a name. Silence. Then floorboards creaking, a small weight shifting closer, and something being set down, quite deliberately, against the side of her hand. Carved wood, one ear rough with char. Her fingers closed around the little wolf, and her chest closed around something larger. Ash, she said. We'll call him Ash, because he went into the fire and came out again. Some do, you know. Her voice stayed light and easy, while her heart broke and reset itself around this child like a bone. Some come out again. The boy leaned, very slightly, against her arm. He weighed nothing. He weighed more than the whole keep above them. That night the summons came, the way she had known it would. A guard at her door, the long cold walk through torchlit corridors to the king's study, and the door closing behind her, with the soft finality of a trap built by a patient man. A fire burned low. Maps on the walls, a wolf pelt, and a crown. the actual iron crown of Night Hollow, sitting on the corner of the desk like a discarded tool. And Alaric Vane standing at the window with his back to her, which was either carelessness or a test, and she already knew this man did nothing carelessly. "Do you know why the tithe exists?" he asked without turning. "To bind the houses to the crown, Majesty." "To bind the houses to the crown," he agreed. "Every noble house must offer the crown a daughter's service, so every noble house sends the daughter it can spare. The lame ones, the scarred ones, the ones they have decided are worthless. Every year I walk those rows, and I look at what the great houses of my kingdom throw away. And every year I choose no one, because choosing would honor the insult." He turned. She watched his boots on the carpet, only the boots. "This year, a blind girl watched my son run toward an open brazier and moved to catch him one full breath before my guards did." The fire ticked. Seren said nothing, because there was nothing left in the world to say, and she was suddenly, absurdly, almost relieved. "You have a choice now," she said quietly. "Majesty." "I have several." He crossed the room, slow boots, and she felt him stop in front of her, close, and then his voice dropped to something that was nearly gentle and entirely terrifying. "Look at me, Majesty. 6 years, I would guess, by the way you hold your face. Perhaps longer. Look at me, Serene of House Vane, or I will have the truth out in the great hall tomorrow, with the whole court for witness, and whatever it is you have been hiding from for 6 years will come and collect you." And so, in the low firelight of the king's study, for the first time in 6 years, Seren lifted her eyes and looked at another human being, looked at him full and straight and seeing, and watched the Alpha King of Night Hollow take the impact of it like a man struck softly in the chest. Her eyes were gray, ordinary storm gray. Whatever he had expected to find in them, sorcery, madness, silver, there was only a young woman looking back at him with the desperate, blazing steadiness of someone who has not been allowed to look at anything for a fifth of her life. "There you are," he said, very low. "You haven't told anyone." Her voice shook, and she hated it. "Why haven't you told anyone? Because everyone in this keep lies to me," he said. "And yours is the first lie I have found interesting." He moved back to the desk, deliberately giving her room to breathe. "Here is our arrangement. By day, you are what you have always been. Blind, harmless, invisible. You keep your mask, and I keep your secret. And in exchange, you will be my eyes. Your eyes. You said it yourself. People speak in front of you. They scheme in front of you. They have made you invisible. And invisible is the one thing a king can never be." A pause. "Someone in my court has been selling Night Hollow to the northern packs. Grain routes, garrison counts, the movements of my patrols. Elder Voss assures me it was a clerk, a nobody, already dealt with. Elder Voss assures me of a great many things. You will attend my son, and you will watch my court, and you will tell me what the blind girl sees. And if I refuse, then you are a woman who has deceived the crown for 6 years, in a kingdom that burns witches on thinner evidence." He said it without heat, the way another man might mention rain. "But you will not refuse, not because of the threat, because you have spent 6 years watching the world through a keyhole, and I have just offered to hand you the door." He was right, and the fact that he was right frightened her more than the threat did. "I'll do it," she said. Then, because something reckless had come loose in her the moment her eyes met his. The contract, the 9th clause, released on the day she has given the king her eyes. "You wrote that before tonight. You wrote it the day you chose me." Something moved through his face, gone too fast to name, and for one strange moment, he looked younger, and worse, he looked lonely. "Good night, Seren," said the Alpha King, and turned back to the window, and she understood that she had just been permitted to see one true thing, and that the audience was over. So the dangerous game began, and the terrible truth of it, the truth she could confess to no one, was that those weeks were the happiest of her life. By day she was the blind attendant, and the court performed itself in front of her as if she were a pillar. Elder Voss received couriers at hours when honest men slept, and paid them from his own purse, not the treasury's. Lady Mayra had letters written by a discreet clerk, letters that went out under a merchant's seal. She carried it all to the study, where the fire was always burning and the king was always awake, and there, in the one room in the kingdom where she was allowed to exist, Saren looked. She looked at maps while he explained the northern passes. She looked at the chessboard he set between them one night without comment, beat him on the fourth evening, and watched him laugh, once, short and rusty, like a door opening on a room no one had entered in years. "You let me win," she accused. "I have never let anyone win anything in my life." "Then you played badly on purpose, which is worse." "I played badly," he said, moving his queen with great dignity, "because you spent the entire middle game looking at the board like a starving woman at a feast, and it was distracting. Look at things less loudly." "I have 6 years of looking saved up," Saren said. "Your Majesty may endure it." And the king glanced up at her across the chessboard, firelight on the hard planes of his face, and endured it. He never touched her. That was the strange grammar of those nights, a distance he kept like a vow, and she began to notice the shape of the thing he was not saying, the way she noticed the west wing. The west wing of Wolfmere Keep was locked, every door, every season. Servants did not clean it. Guards did not walk it. Once, she took a wrong corridor, deliberately wrong, and stood before its great iron-banded doors, and found the dust on the threshold marked by a single line of footprints, a man's, going in and coming out. Whatever was in the west wing, the king visited it alone, and often, and told no one. "What happened at Thornmere?" she asked him one night, too softly, over the chessboard. The fire ticked. His hands stopped above the board. "The lodge burned," he said. "The queen died." My son stopped speaking. "Move your knight." "Majesty." "Move your knight, Saren." She moved her knight, but she had seen his eyes in that half-second, and what lived there was not grief, or not only grief. It was the sleepless shine of a man who has spent 6 years, turning the same night over and over, looking for the seam in it. She knew that shine. It looked back at her out of every polished silver dish. Both of us circling the same fire, she thought that night in her narrow bed. From opposite sides, in the dark. And neither of us will say its name. She could not know, yet, how exactly true that was. Lady Maera struck first at the harvest feast. The tests had begun small. A footstool moved into her path in the prince's corridor. A sewing needle dropped, glinting, on the stair she used each morning, placed exactly where a sighted woman's step would hitch. Saren had walked into the footstool, hard enough to bruise, and had come down the stair without pause, and had listened, both times, to the small, disappointed silence of a hidden watcher. Maera suspected nothing yet. Maera was simply cruel in an exploratory way, the way some people whittle wood. But at the harvest feast, with the great hall roaring gold, and the tables bent under bread and dark ale, Lady Maera rose in silk the color of arterial blood, glided down the high table, and stopped behind the bench where Saren sat helping Tor cut his meat. "A game, Majesty," she called out, bright as a struck bell, and the hall quieted. "They say the blind develop such wondrous senses that they see better than we do. Let the prince's keeper name the guests around her, by scent and sound alone. Surely she cannot fail, unless, of course," and here the little laugh, "there is nothing wrong with her at all." Ice went down Saren's spine. She knows nothing, she told herself. She is guessing. But the hall was turning toward her, 100 faces, and at the high table Elder Voss had set down his cup and was watching with lightless patience, and Saren understood, in her bones, that this was not Maera being cruel. This was Maera being aimed. "My lady does me too much honor," Saren said to the middle distance, pitching her voice meek. "I have no such gifts." "Oh, but try." A hand closed on her shoulder, nails through the wool. "I insist." "Lady Maera." The king had not raised his voice, and yet it filled the hall to the rafters the way cold fills a cellar. "You have mistaken my household for your entertainment. The woman holds my son's knife at my son's table. She is not a feast-day performing bear, and the next hand laid upon her had better belong to someone who has considered the matter carefully." He never looked up from his cup as he said it. The hall laughed nervously and moved on. Maera withdrew, white around the mouth, and Saren sat with her heart hammering and the ghost of nails in her shoulder, and Tor, silent Tor, reached over under the table and put his small hand into hers and squeezed. That night the first snow came early, and she was summoned not to the study but to the battlements, and found the king standing bareheaded in the falling white, looking north. "You shouldn't defend me like that," she said. "People will wonder." "Let them." "Majesty."
A king who guards a servant's dignity in open hall is a riddle, and this court solves riddles for sport. Maera Corvin has been placed in my path with a patience I am only beginning to appreciate, he said. Her great-uncle has spent 6 years arranging her nearer and nearer to me, the way a man arranges kindling. He was quiet a moment. You're shivering. I'm all right. You are lying with your whole body, he said, and unclasped his cloak, the great fur-lined cloak of the Alpha King, and settled it over her shoulders. It fell to her ankles. It was warm from him, and it smelled of pine and iron and smoke, and no one had put a garment on Saren since her mother died, and to her horror, she felt her eyes fill. I can't be seen wearing this, she whispered. There is no one on this wall but us. There's you. Yes, said Alaric Vane, looking down at her in the snow hush, torchlight from the tower door, catching the hard line of his jaw, and something not hard at all in his eyes. There is me. He stepped back before it became more than that. He always stepped back, and Saren stood on the battlements of Wolfmere in the king's own cloak, watching him watch the north, and admitted to herself at last, with the snow coming down like the soft ruin of everything, that she loved him, that it was hopeless, and that hope, as she had learned long ago, was the cruelest wound of all. 3 nights later, the stables burned. She woke to bells and orange light on her ceiling, and she was running before she was fully awake, because she had heard, threaded through the screaming of horses, the one sound the whole keep could not hear over the alarm. She had spent a season learning it, the high thin note of a child who does not speak, trying to. Tor had gone to the stables at dusk, as he often did, to give apples to the old grey mare. No one had counted him missing. Saren went through the yard's chaos like an arrow through smoke, straight to the small side door behind the hayshed, because she had watched Tor use it a dozen times, and inside, in the burning dark, it was 6 years ago, it was Thornmere, it was the smell that lived in the bottom of every nightmare she owned. She found him pressed into the corner of the mare's stall with his sleeve over his face. She got the stall open, got the mare out and the boy onto her back, his arms strangling her neck, and carried him out through the falling embers into the torchlit yard, into a ring of staring faces. And there, gasping, soot-blind with tears, holding the Prince of Night Hollow, Saren looked. At the fire, at the crowd, at Captain Herrick, straight into his eyes, and said, "He needs a healer. Now. His breathing is wrong." The whole yard heard the blind girl say it. The whole yard watched her eyes move from face to face, seeing, seeing, seeing. The silence that came down then was worse than the fire. "Her eyes," someone said. And then Lady Maerce's voice, riding over the crowd, triumphant, almost joyful. "Look at her eyes. She sees. She has seen all along. She has crawled through this court for a season, listening at every door, and lied to the crown's own face. A spy, Majesty. A spy, or a witch." And the king said nothing. He had come into the yard with his sword still in his hand, and he stood 10 feet from her with the fire painting him red and gold, and he looked at Saren holding his coughing son, and said nothing, and did nothing, while Elder Voss came forward, grave and marvelously prepared, and said the words treason and inquiry and confinement, and the guards, apologetic, unstoppable, took the prince from her arms and took her by the wrists. He kept my secret, she thought numbly, as they led her past him, right up until it was worth more to him spent than kept. She did not see what Tor did behind her, the small boy fighting the healer's grip, his scarred face working, like ice breaking up on a river. She only heard it, and so did the whole frozen yard, and so did the king. One word, the first in 6 years, torn out ragged and cracked and unmistakable. Saren. They held her 3 days in a tower room, not a cell, which told her the king was still deciding. On the 3rd night, the door opened, and it was him, alone, with a lamp. The fire was set, he said, without greeting. Pitch on the north wall. My son was inside because someone sent him word at dusk that his old mare was to be put down in the morning. A kitchen boy carried the message and cannot say who paid him. He set the lamp down. His face was terrible, not with anger, with the effort of holding something closed. Voss wants you burned. He is very eloquent on the subject, and half my council weeps along. So you will tell me now, Saren. All of it. Why does a girl of 14 decide to be blind? And she was so tired, and Tor's voice was still tearing through her like a hook,
and so she finally set down the weight she had carried for 6 years. Because of what I saw, she said, at Thornmere. The lamp flame stood perfectly still. So did he. My mother was Alledra, the healer at Thornmere Village. The night the lodge burned, she was called there to tend a kitchen scald, and I carried her satchel. I was in the trees when it started. I saw a man in a courier's cloak bar the summer doors from the outside, Majesty, and pour pitch along the north gallery, below the Queen's rooms, and stand there while it caught, to be sure. And when he turned, he saw me seeing him. Her voice had gone very quiet and very steady. He knew my face. He knew whose daughter I was. My mother told the pack the smoke had ruined my eyes, that I'd been too close, that I was blind. She made me blind to make me worthless as a witness, and it worked, because he came to our cottage a week later with condolences and looked into my eyes, and I looked through him at nothing, and he believed, and let me live. My mother died the next winter. A fever, they said. I have never believed it, and I have been blind ever since, because blind girls are never claimed, and blind girls are never questioned, and blind girls never have to see that man across a feast hall and betray with one glance that they know him. Say his name, said the king, in a voice like the underside of winter. He limps on the left side when he is tired, though he hides it. There is an old burn scar across the back of his right hand. She looked up. Elder Voss, your counselor, the man standing beside you every day for 6 years, Majesty. The Queen had found his letters to the northern packs. She told my mother that much at the lodge. Your wife was not the fire's misfortune. She was its reason. Alaric Vane sat down slowly on the room's one bench, like a tower coming down course by course, and put his face in his hands. And the Alpha King of Night Hollow wept, once, silently, the way stones would weep. And then he told her his own secret, the one behind the locked doors. The West Wing was her library, he said. I have spent 6 years in it at night, reading her papers, her ledgers, her letters, hunting for what she knew, because she wrote me one line the day before she died. Alaric, do not trust the old wolf. I thought grief had made me mad. I have suspected him with no witness, no proof, nothing but a dead woman's handwriting, for 6 years. He raised his head, and his eyes were red and absolutely clear. And then at the tithe, a blind girl watched my son, the way soldiers watch a gate. And I thought, there is another one. There is another person in this kingdom carrying Thornmere and pretending not to. That is why I chose you. That is what the 9th clause meant. I have been waiting all this time for you to give me your eyes. You could have asked. You could have trusted no one for 6 years, and neither could I, he said. We were both blind, Saren. You only did it better. She laughed, wet and broken, and he crossed the room and took her hands, the first time he had ever touched her, and held them as if they were something a man could warm himself at. They will say I shield you because I have lost my heart, he said. They will be right, which is inconvenient, so we will do this in the open, before the whole pack, where Voss's poison cannot reach it. One more mask, my heart, one more day of theater. Can you? I have 6 years of practice, said Saren. Majesty may endure it. The full council met at the next moon, the great hall packed to the walls, and Elder Voss rose in his grey robes to demand judgment on the false blind witch, and got instead a quiet question from the throne about a courier's cloak, and then another about pitch bought in Thornmere Village under a merchant's seal, the same seal, curiously, that franked Lady Mara's letters, and then Captain Herrick's men came in with the discreet clerk, who had kept copies of everything, because frightened men always keep copies. And the hall watched 6 years of patience close around Elder Voss like a trap built by a patient man. When the old wolf finally lunged, shifting halfway, shrieking that the king had been ruled by a peasant witch's eyes, it was the king's voice that ended it, from the throne, without rising. You are right, Voss. For 6 years I was blind. He stood then, and took Saren's hand before the assembled houses of Night Hollow, deliberately, unmistakably. She was the only one who saw. You called her defective. Every house in this hall throws away its daughters and calls them defective. Look what your discards are worth. I would trade the lot of you for her eyes and count myself rich. They wedded, and he claimed her at the next full moon, in the snow-dusted courtyard under a sky like hammered silver, with the whole pack howling the old songs and Tor holding the ribbon crown. And when the Alpha King finally kissed his once-blind bride, long and unhurried while the moon looked on, the torches burned down and the elders coughed, and he did not particularly care. What followed belonged to the two of them alone, behind candlelight and a closed door, and the knight kept it kindly. Lady Mayra was sent home to House Corvin in disgrace, escorted, it was noted, past every servant she had ever kicked. The West Wing was unlocked, aired, and filled with lamps, and became the Queen's library once more. A new queen, reading in the old queen's chair, keeping her promise to a dead woman she had never met. Years later, on a winter evening, a traveler passing Wolfmere Keep would have seen nothing remarkable. Firelight in the windows. A boy, growing tall, reading aloud to a gray-eyed queen by the hearth, his voice clear and easy now. A king watching them from the doorway, with his crown left on the desk like a discarded tool, wearing instead the look of a man who had been handed back more than was ever taken from him. And if the traveler had looked closely at the queen, he might have noticed the way she watched the fire, and the snow, and her husband, and her son, openly, greedily, with the hunger of a woman who once spent 6 years pretending the world was dark, and who never intended to look away again. She had been sent to the castle as the daughter nobody wanted. She had knelt in the tithe rows like a chair, and the coldest king in the north had looked at what the whole kingdom threw away, and chosen it, and been saved by it. That, in the end, was the whole of the story. Love is not blind. Love is the one who finally sees you. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end, my dear friend. It means the world to me. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, if you had been in Saren's place, would you have kept the secret of Thornmere for 6 long years? Or would you have risked everything and spoken out sooner? I read every answer. If this tale touched your heart, subscribe and ring the bell, because a new story is already waiting for you, and I would hate for you to miss it. Until next time, keep your fire warm and your heart open.